Honorable Chief Minister, Dr. Hemanta Vishwa Sharma ji, Director Professor Sitaram ji, faculty members, staff members, dear students. Let me say what a great pleasure it is to be amongst all of you, to look at you, and in a way it makes me nostalgic, it makes me think back perhaps a day when I was sitting somewhere out there. And it's really a very great pleasure to be here. Now, when I would have been sitting back there, I would have asked myself, okay, today one more minister is coming and he's going to give one more speech which we'll all have to listen to. So here's the good news. I don't have a speech. So I'll tell you what I do have. I have a piece of paper, this big, which I sat early in the morning and I asked myself, what could I say which would be relevant to you? What would be my message if I were in your place? So I want to speak very briefly on two subjects, and then very honestly, I would much rather, listen to what interests you. Please feel free to ask me anything you want, and I will reply with whatever I want. So I see today in a way as the voice of experience, that's me, dealing with the sources of energy, that's you. And hopefully at the end of the day, I will walk away with more energy, and some of that experience maybe will rub off onto you. So what really was in my mind as I think of all of you? I know I have come to an IIT and I heard what the director and the chief minister said. IITs are actually among the best recognized Indian brands in the world. I mean, if you go anywhere in the world, and I've lived 40 years in other countries, one thing which everybody knows, they all know IITs. And in fact, what the director raised, the possibility of IITs going out, it is it's something which in my mind should have happened a long time ago. Today, the new education policy provides for it, and I hope one day in the very not distant future, we will actually see it happen, and I hope very much that you are one of the IITs whose footprints extend abroad. So, but when we think IIT, we think engineering, right? But I want you to think of engineering not as a profession, not as a profession alone. I want you to think of engineering as a mentality. Because to me, a non-engineer, but one who's traveled around in the world, an engineer actually has a problem-solving approach. In engineering, if you don't know it, you don't think it doesn't exist. You think you haven't found it. And to my mind, today, the leadership which engineering institutions and engineering products can give to the country is to actually look at our hundreds and thousands of problems and tell yourself, I can find some answer to it. It will never ever be a complete answer, but it will be an answer. And what I saw the time I spent, being exposed to some of the innovations and the startup ideas and suggestions you have, I saw answers out there. I saw answers to problems which have existed, in our lives, which maybe in other institutions or maybe in another time, people would not have given that much thought, mind space to solving those issues. So, and I say this because I truly believe today, I can almost feel the country shifting gears, that when we talk today about a startup policy, when we talk about a skill policy, when we look at Prime Minister's research fellows, when we think of an innovation mission, when we see that, startups are not just a nice catchy word which happens in other people's countries. It is actually in front of your eyes. You can see, young people like you develop ideas, take it into the business world, make it happen. And that's really a state of society which didn't exist when I was your age, and I truly envy you for it. Now, the second thought which occurred to me, and I say this today as a minister in the government, what is it that we can do to actually, I would say, spread that problem-solving, engineering frame of mind? We can do a lot really by focusing on the enablers. It starts with very basics. Today, the engagement I had before this was a conference called Nadi 3.0. It was about how rivers have shaped civilization's connectivity. But I look at something as basic as water. Water is life. And yet, we have a situation 75 years after independence, where a large number of households do not get water in their homes. Just as till a few years ago, a large number of houses didn't get power in their homes. And, to a lot of people, it is something which troubles you. I think to some people, they just accept it. But as someone who traveled around in the world, I can tell you it hurts you. The idea that others have come that far ahead, that very basic things were not available in our country. And when I think of the changes in my life and that of my generation, why these last 8 years from 2014 have been very important for us is that long-standing issues that we knew existed, we did not approach it with that engineering frame of mind that I'm speaking to you about. We did not have a leader who said, okay, in my tenure, I will make sure every house has a power connection. Every house has a water connection. People will own homes. That I will ensure everybody goes to school, particularly all girls go to school. If there is an impediment to going to school, of which toilets were a big one, I will fix it. I will ensure once they go to school that there is a skilling opportunity for them, that there is from that there are employment opportunities, there are innovation opportunities, and you actually then see, once you start, approach our country, our society with its age-old problems, you then see how these now suddenly start to change. So a lot of what we are trying to do today, there is an old saying that for a hungry person, you can give them fish, but if you really want to help them, teach them fishing. So my first E to you today was engineering. My second E to you today is enabling. That if you can actually enable a society to have the capabilities, to have the mindset to sort its problems, then there's no limit to the change that we can do. I also have a third E to describe our challenges. It's employment. Now, again, you'd say, okay, what's so great about it? It's so obvious. But think about the debates in our society. You have a debate, how do we distribute what we have better? It's a very legitimate debate. You have a debate, how do we produce more? How should growth be hastened? Completely understandable. But if we want to get our society right, it is never completely about production. It is never completely about distribution. To find the right balance, it is actually about what impact it has on employment. And there too, there is a change which is happening. We've had growth, a very strong growth for 25 years from the 1992 reform. But if you actually look at employment, the rise in employment did not track the rise in our economic growth. And the reason was we didn't put employment at the center of our definition of success. So when I sort of contemplate your future, what would be the next 20 years? I would very much hope that we are able to build an India that is very focused on employment. And to my mind, employment finally means more manufacturing, it means more self-employment, it means formalization of the economy, it means more startups, it means really maximizing the spread of technology. So an India which is more employed, an India which is better enabled, an India, as I said, which has an engineering mindset. Because again, as a global traveler, and a global traveler with a sense of history, the big countries of the world today, America, Russia, China, they have actually in their leadership have had a tremendous input of engineers, because engineers have actually had a very, very critical role in that big thinking, as I said, in the problem solving, in actually taking visions and getting it down on the ground. So that's the vision of India that I wanted to share with you. But I also want to very briefly tell you a little bit about what I do, because I don't get a captive audience that often. So let me give you a sense too of what is happening on the foreign policy side. Some of it the director has spoken about, some of it the chief minister has referred to. I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of diplomacy. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it looks like a good life. Maybe it means travel, people in suits. I want to tell you, it's actually a mission. It's an obsession. It's a passion. If you really want to be good at it, you have to be driven. And what drives you is actually a sense of what you want to get from the world for your country. And today, if I were to say the way I describe, how India grows, how has our diplomacy grown? I would say perhaps more than ever before, our diplomacy is today focused on development. When we travel out, the Chief Minister referred to the Quad meeting we've had. When we go out there, we say, what is it we are going to get from this engagement, those conversations, these impressions, which we can take back to India, which will make our country a better, more advanced, a more modern society. Now, it's not unique, This is not rocket science. Actually, all countries, and the bulk of actually radical transformational development in the last 150 years has actually been in Asia, starting with Japan in the 1860s. Then you had the Soviet Union in the 1920s, 30s. You had ASEAN, you had actually Korea, Taiwan, you had ASEAN, you had then China, and we are the next in that, in a sense, in the queue of development. Countries develop fastest, best, most efficiently, most economically, when they actually have that goal that my foreign interactions must have an application at home. And that, in many ways, is what today our life is about. I remind you of the example the Chief Minister gave, working with Japan to build bridges across the Brahmaputra, working with Japan to improve the sewage and the water system of Guwahati, Now, I can give you countless examples from other countries. I mean, I was in Finland. They were talking to me about using bamboo in the Numaligarh refinery to actually diversify the nature of the fuel that it produces. You can see today in our infrastructure, big corridors like the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the Freight Corridor, the bullet train project which is now underway. Or, in fact, I kind of rewind your own life. Look at even the origins of the IITs. The IITs were all created by international partnerships. Our I would say, I don't want to say error, but our shortcoming was that we did not keep up the pace. We did not scale up through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the way many other countries did. So we had the right ideas. We didn't apply it efficiently enough. We didn't scale it up fast enough. So you actually have a situation, it may come as a surprise to many of you, that when Rajiv Gandhi visited China in 1988, India's per capita income was about the same level as China, actually was a little bit higher. Today, China's per capita income is 5 times ours. And what's the difference? The difference was that they were much more radical about the reform, but they were much more effective and efficient in actually translating visions onto the ground. Or if I were to give you a different metaphor, they had more engineers. And they had more engineers in the decision-making level. So the point today where diplomacy is concerned, I want to make to you is we engage the world today very much with the idea that the world is a partner in technology, it is a partner in capital, it is a partner in best practices. We must have an open mind. When we see something we like, the greatest tribute you can do to a good idea is to go home and practice it yourself. And a lot of the change that especially Prime Minister Modi has brought about in the last 8 years has actually been that kind of approach to the world. The second, of course, is every society needs to be secured. And in a way, actually, diplomacy is the first line of defense. If diplomacy is successful, you don't ever need a military to defend you. So, and sometimes if you reach a stage where the military response is required, there too, defense diplomacy is a supporting force for the military. So, again, when we think of securing the country, we think typically of an adversarial state. Now, I think all of you know what I have in mind there. But think again, think locally. Till a few years ago, this region actually used to have a serious concern about terrorism, about separatism, about narcotics, about trafficking. What has helped to deal with it? Actually, diplomacy. The fact that we made sure that they got no support in any neighboring country has actually made this region and your existence much more secure, much more peaceful, and much more prosperous. So, with the evolution of technology, our sense of what is security, both in terms of problems and challenges, also change. So, when we think security today, we think today data security, we think cyber security. We worry about the normal being weaponized in many ways against a society. So that too is a responsibility of diplomacy. But if we are successful in development and we are successful in securing our country, this is really a case where 1 + 2 makes 3. It is then that we are actually able to exert global influence. And I suggest to you that if you have seen India much more visible on the global stage, if you see today a projection of our culture, let us take the International Day of Yoga. If you see us taking initiatives like we have done on Solar Alliance or disaster resilience, if you see us actually responding to, an earthquake in Nepal or cyclone in Mozambique, or even today actually to an economic crisis in Sri Lanka. All of that is happening because we are building more capabilities. We have today instruments and influence that we did not have earlier. But again, my point is progress should actually increase our appetite. A society with a small stomach really doesn't have a future. Unless we have really an insatiable sense of what our prospects are, we will somewhere stop to grow, and this country will, I cannot ever see that happening. And finally, a few words about the ordinary person. Because again, as I said, there is a caricature of diplomacy. The diplomacy is something up there. I want you to think diplomacy actually affects you every day. And I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of it. Many of you, I presume and I hope, have passports. Ask your parents, how hard was it to get a passport? How long did it take for them to get a passport? And now see how, passport is like a step beyond your Aadhaar card. It's not just our ability today to use digital instruments and a different governance mindset to do what, to my mind, again, is a very basic facility. I believe that passport is not a privilege. Passport is an entitlement. To me, anybody who wants a passport should have the ability to get the passport. But the fact that we can make it happen today actually says something about what tools of technology can do, because it is actually on a digital backbone that we are able today to take a process which would take, I think, reasonably between 6 months to maybe a year to get a passport. Today, if somebody doesn't get a passport in a week, they say nasty things about us on Twitter. So the point I'm making is, look at what a difference we've made to the life of an ordinary person. But I give you another example. An example close to your heart. We have 1 million students plus studying abroad. We have actually NRI, we have 7 million workers in the Gulf. If you look at non-resident Indians and persons of Indian origin, there are 30 million of them. They can today actually go out in the world with a sense of confidence that the country will look after them. And we've shown that. We showed that recently in Ukraine, and we've shown it actually time and time again. We showed that during the COVID pandemic, that actually the Vande Bharat mission, which brought back 7 million people, is the largest recorded evacuation in human history. Now, here too, some of it is capability. A lot of it is also leadership. It is about willpower. So my message to you today is, look, we are, this country, this society, your generation, you are at the cusp of actually a very big change. I saw for myself, and I heard the director speak about, in fact, the Chief Minister also, about the contributions which were made by your own IIT during COVID. But think about something which today we all see as so normal. The fact that everybody in this room, I hope, is vaccinated. It's so natural, and yet it is so remarkable. Because let me tell you, there are large parts of the world where this did not happen and still hasn't happened. And not just vaccinated. Often, we were at the end of the queue for anything new that happened. The idea that we could actually have invented in India vaccine, that we could actually have multiple Make in India vaccines. And even on Make in India, I would say, the same vaccine was actually made at multiple places. In terms of scale and, I would say, efficiency, the Indian producer was actually way ahead of his peer group in the rest of the world. So I cite that to you. You know, the amazing thing about the world is remarkable things are happening around us every day. Okay, we should not ignore that they are remarkable. We should not marvel that they are remarkable, because then we kind of say, okay, that's exception, we can't ever do it again. We have to be aware of it, we have to internalize it, we have to create that new normal, and then we have to proceed to take our country, our society, the coming generations to the next stage. When I look at all of you, I mean, I see the medium which will make it happen. Once again, I want to say it's today, for me, really a great source of energy, of even inspiration, that I have an opportunity to come and talk to you, and I'd be very happy to respond to any thoughts that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for motivating and enlightening us with your words. We are now open to the interactive Q&A session with Dr. Jaishankar. Our students and faculty members have shown an enormous interest in interacting with you, sir. To make use of the limited time that we have for the interactive session, I will call out the names of those who have shown interest, and each one of you may ask your question. The first question to you, sir, is from Aishwarya Parmeshwar Iyer from Sarla Birla School.
While the mic comes, I don't want to waste her time. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Aishwarya Parmeshwar Iyer, and I'm a student of class 12, presently studying at Sarla Birla Gyan Jyoti Guwahati. Your career has been a huge source of inspiration for me, sir, and I was hoping that you could guide me on the best way to study foreign relations and foreign policies between different countries, and how to pursue a career in international relations.
You know, if I were to truthfully answer that question, I think you'll find I'm a very bad guide. And I'll tell you why. I didn't know for a long time what I really wanted to do. So, in a sense, I'm a little older than all of you. So, in those days, I must say, you didn't have that many choices, you didn't have that much information. Your parents were more inflexible than I think I've been to my kids. So you sort of drifted along till you found your groove. And I must say, as part of the drift, I even spent a few months in an IIT, in IIT Delhi, actually. I had registered for a master's degree in chemistry. And somewhere, I think, I realized, okay, this chemistry and I are not a natural fit. But when I look back, I would only say this to you, which I actually told my children, and it of course made them do strange things. Do what you are actually interested in. If you can make a profession of your passion, I can tell you, you will be excellent at it. So when I finally actually hit political science, like the Chief Minister, as a subject, I read my course books. You know, they gave you a reading list for the semester. I actually read it because I found it fun. I enjoyed it. So it took me a few weeks to finish a few months' work, and I didn't even realize I was actually doing my course study. So I think it's very important. You know, you hear this cliche, you should be pursuing your dreams. Let me tell you, it actually has a practical sense. Those who have a deep interest in something, you want to go after it. I know the difficulties, you know. I still remember the day telling a family where everybody had done science that I decided to switch from a master's in organic chemistry to a master's in political science. It was not an easy conversation. So, but my advice to you is this: stick with what you really have a feel for. And I assure you, it'll work.
Thank you, sir.
The next question is from Sumit Nayan.
Namaste, sir. I am Sumit Nayan from BTech first year from IIT Guwahati. Sir, my question to you is, how you feel when you have to take the decision on the behalf of 125 crore people of India? It's too much pressure, I think, in my opinion. And how you able to handle this pressure and the responsibility?
I think it's 1:36 now. Yeah. That's okay, you know. Maybe it's changed even while this meeting is going on. But look, I tell you one thing. It's not pressure. It's actually you have I don't know, a kind of a tailwind, you know, something out there which gives you a bounce, a different sense. Because, you know, I don't want this to sound as lacking in humility. That's not my intent. But the fact is, when you speak for every fifth or sixth person in the world, when the decisions which you have influenced or contributed to impact so many people, when you know, you feel pressure if you feel your mistakes can harm them, which is completely understandable, but then you also have that adrenaline when your good judgments can help them, can take them forward. So I would say overall, you know, when you stand out there representing India, and I mean, how do I put it to you? You know, when your national anthem plays, when your flag goes up, when you're standing out there, it's a feeling very difficult to describe. And it's a very good feeling.
Thank you.
The next question is from Deepak Kumar Mishra.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Deepak Kumar Mishra. I'm a research scholar from Chemical Engineering Department here. So my question to you, sir, in the current geopolitical situation, how can India manage to maintain its stand of non-alignment in such a polarized world? Thank you.
Look, this is not a new challenge, but I grant you, every time it happens, when the world polarizes, it has its own complications. And we are at that state right now. Because partly, I mean, there are multiple reasons. The conflict in Ukraine is one reason, but that's not the only reason. I think the polarization in Asia has a very completely different reason for it and a basis for it. How do you manage it? First of all, we need to be clear about what our interests are. We need to be confident that we will be pursuing them. At the same time, we need to be skilled to both build a narrative and harmonize what are our interests with as many others as possible in the international community. You know, I can stand up and say, you know, look, this is what India wants, this is what India thinks. It's not easy, difficult to do. But I would not be doing my job if I did it in a way in which I alienate everybody else in the room who actually feel, well, you know, this person is a very selfish person who's only thinking of themselves. And we are not. I mean, we are not a selfish country. In fact, I mean, we are a country which in many ways has been generous even at a time when, you know, we were much poorer. So a lot of this, what you know, you ask me, how do you handle a polarized world? I think once you have the clarity, once it is backed up by confidence, once, in a sense, I would say, you've done your numbers right, you've done your preparations, you figure out what are the interests of other people, and then you put it to them in a way in which it makes sense. Diplomacy is, a lot of it is a very intercultural exercise. You're talking to somebody from a very different society, often with a different language or any other social characteristic. And if you're really good in your business, you need to understand what is in their mind and put it to them in a way in which they will understand it, which is where experience and education comes in. So if you are to use an example, I would, if I were to talk to an American or a Russian or a Chinese or a Japanese, I would use an example from their history, from their society, a metaphor which they will understand. But it is a similar activity I can describe to you is a little bit like sports. A good batsman has to know what is going through the bowler's mind. And that's really when you read the ball coming in. So it's a test, okay? Because there's a competition going on here. Each one tries to be a step beyond the other. I mean, diplomacy is very, very often like that. So it does take, actually, as I said, it's not a bad life, but it's a very hard life. It requires a lot of hard work, a lot of diligence, a lot of understanding of what other people are about.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I request Professor Pahi Saikia to ask a question.
Thank you. A very good afternoon, sir. Thank you for being here and for your wonderful thoughts that you shared with us today. Sir, this question, I am Pahi Saikia. I teach political science. My focus is international relations and comparative politics in IIT Guwahati in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences.
Okay, so there would have been a future for me in IIT. I'm delighted to know that.
Yes, sir. So my question is related to the Chin refugees in Mizoram, which is very specific, and India's relations with our neighboring country, Myanmar, and have been working on it for a few years now. Sir, we have seen that undocumented migration has, a lot of ethnocultural reasons, particularly people displaced from Myanmar in the current context, and also in history we have seen to the neighboring regions, particularly in India's northeast. And in Mizoram, we have seen that, particularly in Mizoram, you'll see in more than 11 districts, the displaced people from the Chin district, state of Myanmar have taken shelter. So in this present context, sir, what do you think could be done to address the question or the security concerns that we have in relation to the undocumented people settling or taking shelter in Mizoram, both from our traditional or a military as well as a non-traditional and human security perspective? Thank you so much.
I'd give you two answers, one specific to Myanmar and one as a general approach. Come, please do sit down. The Myanmar answer would be this. Look, there is no point, you can't fix this problem at a third order consequence. If things were not happening on our border, something happened in Yangon and Napido in the capital, which then created a cascading impact, which finally spills onto our border, which is what you are talking about. So I can be sympathetic to what is to a human situation on my border, but it doesn't solve the problem. If I have to fix it, I have to go back to what is in a sense, the root cause. And the root cause today is really what happened when the military took over from the previous NLD government. So what we are trying to do is really to see if we can contribute in some way to fixing that problem. Because if that problem gets fixed, then this will automatically solve itself. I can only apply band-aids at this level. It will not really fix that problem. And my challenge is, you have countries which are far away, who have, very black and white positions. They don't have to deal with the consequences of it. If I was sitting 5,000 miles away, I can also give sort of very sweeping prescriptions. But if I'm next door, I have a very different take. Because for me, you referred to the fact that there are people coming over. I'll give you other examples. We are finding people across the boundary are not vaccinated. So actually, because the governance has weakened or deteriorated so much in Myanmar, our border areas have an exposure to the pandemic which is not right, which is not fair. We are seeing actually shortages of food as well, and it's not that there is a supply problem, there is often a distribution problem. So we actually believe today that there should be a greater effort made at sorting out the larger political crisis in Myanmar so that this third order consequence that you are referring to is addressed. But having said that, I want to make one general observation. Look, everybody, we're all human beings. None of us likes to see grief or sorrow or distress or humanitarian situation. But we also have our own homes to run. We have our societies to take care of. To me, progress and good governance is not being, I would say, oblivious to what is happening on our borders and what it then does at home. I think today we have the ability to actually track what is happening on our border, to monitor that, to ensure that the rights of our citizens and the interests of our country is also equally protected. We are not open house for the rest of the world. I don't think it is in our interest to be so.
Next question is from Lieutenant Colonel Udit Chaturvedi.
Jain sir. Sir, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Udit Chaturvedi, presently pursuing my master's in communication engineering. Sir, I would request the Honorable Minister to kindly enlighten us with respect to the changing dynamics in Indian subcontinent, especially our immediate neighbors, that is Sri Lanka and Nepal. How do we envisage countering the Chinese exploitation of this scenario, sir?
Again, it's a competitive world, but it's also a world where we need to be confident of ourselves. When I look at our neighbors, if you take history, geography, sociology, any human indicator you want to use, actually have so much in common with us. Now, having something in common with your neighbor is not necessarily a plus. There are also some insecurities which can come with it, which is natural. My sense is our best policy towards the neighborhood, and we actually have thought about it at great length, and we even have a name for it. It's called Neighborhood First. It is a policy which should very clearly recognize to ourselves, we are the biggest country by far. We are the only country with whom each one of our neighbors is connected. Very few of our neighbors, Bangladesh and Myanmar have a common border, but by and large, if you see, the bulk of our neighbors only have a border with us as opposed to another neighbor. They are far behind us in the development curve, many of them. Even if their per capita income may be higher than ours in some cases like Sri Lanka, in terms of capabilities, there are many things they don't have. So we need to make up our minds. Do we want a larger, prosperous, secure, participative neighborhood? So it's really, it's like you in the street where you live. You know, do you want everybody else on that street to also have a reasonably good life? Maybe you're paying the electricity bill, maybe you're building the road, maybe you're paying for the chowkidar at the end of the street. But do you really want, are you prepared to go the extra mile so that the entire neighborhood is actually in a good place? We could have a different approach, and at times we've had, which is we get into a kind of a dynamic with a neighbor. You know, they do something which we don't like, and you know, we kind of reciprocate. I think we have today, especially Prime Minister Modi's government, we are very clear that we have to be generous, we have to be non-reciprocal. There can be problems, we must be big enough to think beyond that, work beyond that. It will not always be problem-free, we have to accept that also. But finally, we must be the larger sort of lifting tide for the entire neighborhood. You also put it in terms of, you know, how does it work vis-a-vis China? Look, the world's a very competitive place. You know, that's why I actually compared diplomacy and sport. I mean, don't ever expect a competitor to give you a loose ball, an easy ride. They won't do that. That's not, you know, that's not how they think. So, but I'm not doing it because I have competition. I'm doing it because it's in my interest. If I do what is good for me, actually, in a sense, a lot of my competitive problems get taken care of. And this morning, when we were talking about this Nadi conference, you have to just understand the enormity of the change which is taking place around all of you right now. That links with Bangladesh, which were cut off in 1965, road links, rail links are being restored. Inland waterways are coming in. We are working how to access their ports. There's a power supply. We supply them more than 1,000 megawatts of electricity. There's a fuel supply we are working on. It's not just Bangladesh. Something of a lesser scale is happening with Myanmar. It is happening with Bhutan as well, and with Nepal. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be outward. I mean, we are very big importers of hydel power from Bhutan. And you know, in this day and age when people are moving away from fossil fuel, that is something which is a very, very big plus. So I would say, you know, politics is about calculation, but really smart politicians don't do just tactical calculations. They sometimes give in order to get. And generosity is not just you feel good here, it's also in many ways something which needs to be thought up there.
Next question is from Shipra Rajput.
Namaste, sir. Actually, I was very much excited about your visit. My name is Shipra Rajput, and I'm a PhD scholar in EEE department. So my question to you is, India has a large number of talented and skilled youths. As we can see, our tech graduates are running the top tech giants in the world, like Google, Microsoft, etc. So, sir, I would like to ask, what effective measures will help to retain the talent in our country in order to realize our dream of India becoming a world leader or Vishwa Guru?
You know, I think in my remarks I shared with some of you that when I travel around the world and look at the progress of other countries, it hurts me sometimes when I say, why isn't this happening in my own? And today, quite honestly, I feel much better because I think a lot of changes are happening in my own. Now, something similar also happens in terms of talent. That when you, I must say, by the way, I would also say a large part of my school class, they graduated, many of them went into IITs, and many of them actually went abroad. So now that at this age and stage we all have a WhatsApp group, we are all trying to locate each other, and I'm actually quite amazed how many of my classmates lived abroad. Now, it happened to, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. To my mind, people who go abroad have actually been an enormous catalyst of change in our country. I'm not talking because they remit money or because they, inspire us. Because we Indians are family oriented, even those Indians who go abroad stay in touch with their families at home. So for every one person out there, 5 others have some connectivity and some influence, and we keep talking to people. And so there's actually, it's very non-quantifiable, but the Indians abroad actually have been a very powerful force of change in India. But yet, your point, you mentioned, when Indians have done very well abroad in big companies. I think a large part of it is that the governance system in India did not steadily broaden opportunities, generation by generation. You have opportunities today, definitely more than I had. But if I were to say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it was much less. A lot of what we are seeing now, I mean, what I hear, the whole idea of innovation, startup, even, and it doesn't need to be at a tech level. Even the idea that people who do informal jobs can actually get credit, can get financing, can get microfinancing without any kind of collateral. It's actually a revolutionary idea. I mean, in our country, people didn't do it. The banks actually would not look at a very large segment of our population. And that is one of the, when I spoke about those remarkable changes which you now assume is normal, this is one of the remarkable changes which has happened actually in the last few years. So I would say, to me, how do you create more opportunities? How do you promote? How do you encourage people to do more things and make businesses out of it? To actually, and a lot of what we are doing, the enabling E I spoke about. If you have a drone policy, for example, you are sending a signal that, look, there's a whole drone domain out there in which you can make a living. If you have a space policy, you can do so. I think we are still evolving. There's enormous room for growth, to my mind, in this, but how, to my mind, the more we are able to make our own society an exciting place for talent, I see our national prospects very much tied to it.
Next question is from Harshavardhan.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Harshvardhan Ruikherkar, a BTech student in Mechanical Engineering Department. Sir, my question to you is, what does the life of an IFS officer look like, especially in countries like Pakistan or China?
I can tell you secondhand about Pakistan. I've never lived there. I visited there. I lived 4.5 years in China. I can speak with a little more authority. Look, again, there's the good side, there's the side which gets the imagery and the admiration. There's the difficult side. And I'd share very small things which matter a lot. I went, most of my schooling was pretty much done in one school. I lived in Delhi, from the time I was a child till I went to university. I spent in all 2 years out of Delhi. Except for those 2 years, I was in the same school. I spent out of those 15, 18 years, maybe 10, 12 years living in the same place. My people who are my childhood friends, were my adult friends when I went to work. Now, when you do this nomadic life that I'm telling you about, it's not just you. I mean, there's the good side of it. You find it, every time you go to a new place, it's exciting. You read about it. You often, sometimes you go to the same place twice, you know the region or something. It didn't happen in my case. I did 8 postings, 7 of them were to completely different countries. So often you went to a place which you had only read about in a book, and believe me, I'm a pre-internet age guy, okay? So I didn't even have anything, there was no web for me to check and say, okay, what does the place look like? So you have the social restrictions often, that if you live in a society which is not that open, your circle of friends is very different. So it's all business and less social. It can be very disruptive. As I said, I went to one school most of my life. I think my children would have gone to at least 4 or 5. There's one part of it, I was asked an earlier question, what is it like to represent so many people? But there's also the tension, the responsibility, the problems. So it's, if you are in a place, because you gave me 2 examples of 2 very tough relationships, where sometimes something happens between the countries, and that impacts on you, because you are the point person, or you have to deal with it. Or the period when I was in China as ambassador, we actually had a border standoff in Depsang in 2013. We had other issues with them relating to border and so on. So it's a mixed bag. But having said that, I wouldn't have traded it for anything else. It was something which is a kind of a profession, one of a kind. You grow every day. You are actually a very Atmanirbhar person, because you are operating with a very limited systemic support. You think you have a 360 view which you very rapidly develop. So there are a lot of personal qualities. They come with a cost. Often the costs are with the family. But sometimes tough places are very educative. You mentioned Pakistan and China. I actually spent 2.5 years, 3 years almost in Sri Lanka during the time we had a peacekeeping force, where things were very, very violent. So those are all the ups and downs you got to take, but it's part of what you have chosen. And as I said, at the end of the day, when you represent 1.24, 1.36, it's something which motivates you. Should we?
2 more. Next is from Ashish Kumar Tiwari.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ashish Kumar Tiwari. I am pursuing my MTech in EEE department. My question to you is, in the recent times, we have noticed that India's diplomatic stand is getting stronger, especially during this Ukraine-Russia war. How well is this India's assertive and more independent approach in its foreign policy being received by the EU and the USA? Why were the things not the same before?
Well, that's not not an easy question to answer. Why were things not like that before? But I tell you very honestly, it's not like we one day woke up and said, okay, from tomorrow morning we're going to be assertive. What happened very honestly was that on some issues, there was a concerted effort made to pressurize us. A lot of it came from the media, international media. Some of it came from other governments. And, when you have that kind of situation where others push you to do something which you do not believe is in your interest, or to make a choice which you do not agree with, or to forego a choice which you do not wish to do, you have to decide what is the best way of dealing with those kinds of pressures. It's natural inclination to first say, okay, let me try and explain, let's be tactful about it, maybe they will understand. Then at some point of time you realize that, no, they know exactly what they're doing. If they are saying something about you, it's not like they have a different set of numbers. They have the same set of numbers that you do. So I think at that stage it's important to speak up. So I'm not, I am honestly not a combative person, but I also am a person who believes that when I have to draw a line and say what I have to say, I would be prepared to do that, because I think the interests of the country require us to do that.
Thank you, sir.
The final question is from Professor Palash Ghosh.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Dr. Palash Ghosh, Assistant Professor, Department of Mathematics. So as a External Affairs Minister, you have to answer a lot of difficult questions.
Like I'm doing now.
On the spot. And some of the questions are very sensitive in nature, considering the geopolitical issues and all those things. And each of your words can be interpreted differently by national and international media. So how do you prepare yourself mentally before going to a press conference?
Look, this answer is actually going to scare you, and I hope you don't lose confidence in me. Most of the time, you don't actually, consciously prepare. Meaning what happens? This is something we do as a routine. Even you keep discussing, you keep engaging. And it's not just me. I have, after all, a spokesperson of the government who works in my ministry. They have a briefing. So you keep, I would say, like net practice, you keep discussing things. If they ask this, what would you say? What is the messaging we should put out? What is it we should not say? Exactly what you said. How would we be read here? But at some stage, if you've done enough of it and you have a sort of aptitude for it, you have internalized it so deeply that it's a instinctive response. So there is something there. There is a training, There is a experience. There is something which is at the end of the day, the body is such a great machine that maybe it's got assimilated out there. So often I would say when I think back at some of the difficult situations, typically there would be about 70-80% in any situation which you would have anticipated, you would know. Because it's not like you walk in without preparation. Ideally, I would like to, ideally, I would have liked to know what all you guys were going to ask me today, ideally. But often, I would say 10% would take you by surprise or would come at you from an angle you haven't thought. And that's really where your instinct and your experience comes in. And by the way, I'd be honest, and sometimes you make mistakes. That is also, in diplomacy, I'm not talking about, it doesn't have to be me personally, but, important people sometimes don't say the right things or don't pick the right words. And it can have consequences too. That does happen. So your question is completely legitimate. So I hope that now that you've planted that thought in my mind, it doesn't make me nervous the next time I go to a press conference. But I would still go with my instinct. So thank you.
Thank you so much.